Chapter 3. Ananda, you have not yet understood that all the defiling objects that appear, all the illusory, ephemeral characteristics, spring up in the very spot where they also come to an end. They are what is called illusory falseness, but their nature is in truth the bright substance of wonderful enlightenment. Thus it is throughout, up to the 5 skandhas and the 6 entrances, to the 12 places and the 18 realms, the union and mixture of various causes and conditions account for their illusory and false existence, and the separation and dispersion of the causes and conditions result in their illusory and false extinction. Who would have thought that production, extinction, coming, and going are fundamentally the everlasting, wonderful light of the treasury of the Thus Come One, the unmoving, all-pervading perfection, the wonderful nature of true suchness. If within the true and eternal nature one seeks coming and going, confusion and enlightenment, or birth and death, there is nothing that can be obtained. Ananda, why do I say that the 5 skandhas are basically the wonderful nature of true suchness, the treasury of the Thus Come One? Ananda, consider this example. When a person who has pure clear eyes looks at clear, bright emptiness, he sees nothing but clear emptiness, and he is quite certain that nothing exists within it. If, for no apparent reason, the person does not move his eyes, the staring will cause fatigue, and then of his own accord, he will see strange flowers in space and other unreal appearances that are wild and disordered. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of form. Ananda, the strange flowers come neither from emptiness nor from the eyes. The reason for this, Ananda, is that if the flowers were to come from emptiness, they would return to emptiness. If there is a coming out and a going in, the space would not be empty. If emptiness were not empty, then it could not contain the appearance of the arisal and extinction of the flowers, just as Ananda's body cannot contain another Ananda. If the flowers were to come from the eyes, they would return to the eyes. If the nature of the flowers were to come from the eyes, it would be endowed with the faculty of seeing. If it could see, then when it left the eyes it would become flowers in space, and when it returned it should see the eyes. If it did not see, then when it left the eyes it would obscure emptiness, and when it returned, it would obscure the eyes. Moreover, when you see the flowers, your eyes should not be obscured. So why is it that the eyes are said to be pure and bright when they see clear emptiness? Therefore, you should know that the skandha of form is empty and false, because it neither depends on causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider the example of a person whose hands and feet are relaxed and at ease and whose entire body is in balance and harmony. He is unaware of his life processes, because there is nothing agreeable or disagreeable in his nature. However, for some unknown reason, the person rubs his 2 hands together in emptiness, and sensations of roughness, smoothness, cold, and warmth seem to arise from nowhere between his palms. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of feeling. Ananda, all this illusory contact does not come from emptiness, nor does it come from the hands. The reason for this, Ananda, is that if it came from emptiness, then since it could make contact with the palms, why wouldn't it make contact with the body? It should not be that emptiness chooses what it comes in contact with. If it came from the palms, it could be readily felt without waiting for the 2 palms to be joined. What is more, if it were to come from the palms, then the palms would know when they were joined. When they separated, the contact would return into the arms, wrists, the bones, and the marrow, and you also should be aware of the course of its entry. It should also be perceived by the mind because it would behave like something coming in and going out of the body. In that case, what need would there be to put the 2 palms together to experience what is called contact? Therefore, you should know that the skandha of feeling is empty and false, because it neither depends on causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider the example of a person whose mouth waters at the mention of sour plums, or the soles of whose feet tingle when he thinks about walking along a precipice. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of thinking. Ananda, you should know that the watering of the mouth caused by the mention of the plums does not come from the plums, nor does it come from the mouth. The reason for this, Ananda, is that if it were produced from the plums should speak for themselves. Why wait for someone to mention them? If it came from the mouth itself should hear, and what need would there be wait for the ear? If the ear alone heard, then why doesn't the water come out of the ear? Thinking about walking along a precipice is explained in the same way. Therefore, you should know that the skandha of thinking is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a swift rapids whose waves follow upon one another in orderly succession, the ones behind never overtaking the ones in front. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of activity. Ananda, thus the nature of the flow does not arise because of emptiness, nor does it come into existence because of the water. It is not the nature of water, and yet it is not separate from either emptiness or water. The reason for this, Ananda, is that if it arose because of emptiness, then the inexhaustible emptiness throughout the 10 directions would become an inexhaustible flow, and all the worlds would inevitably be drowned. If the swift rapids existed because of water, then their nature would differ from that of water and the location and characteristics of its existence would be apparent. If their nature were simply that of water, then when they became still and clear they would no longer be made up of water. Suppose it were to separate from emptiness and water, there isn't anything outside of emptiness, and outside of water there isn't any flow. Therefore, you should know that the skandha of activity is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a man who picks up a Kalavinka pitcher and stops up its 2 holes. He lifts up the pitcher filled with emptiness and, walking some 1,000 li away, presents it to another country. You should know that the skandha of consciousness is the same way. Thus, Ananda, the space does not come from one place, nor does it go to another. The reason for this, Ananda, is that if it were to come from another place, then when the stored up emptiness in the pitcher went elsewhere, there would be less emptiness in the place where the pitcher was originally. If it were to enter this region, when the holes were unplugged and the pitcher was turned over, one would see emptiness come out. Therefore, you should know that the skandha of consciousness is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Moreover, Ananda, why do I say that the 6 entrances have their origin in the wonderful nature of true suchness, the treasury of the thus come one? Ananda, although the eye's staring causes fatigue, the eye and the fatigue originate in bodhi. Staring gives rise to the characteristic of fatigue. Because a sense of seeing is stimulated in the midst of the 2 false, defiling objects of light and dark, defiling appearances are taken in, this is called the nature of seeing. Apart from the 2 defiling objects of light and dark, this seeing is ultimately without substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that seeing does not come from light or dark, nor does it come forth from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. If it came from light, then it would be extinguished when it is dark, and you would not see darkness. If it came from darkness, then it would be extinguished when it is light, and you would not see light. Suppose it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of light and dark, a nature of seeing such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came forth from emptiness. When it looks in front of you, it sees the shapes of the defiling dust, turning around, it would see your sense organ. Moreover, if it were emptiness itself which sees, what connection would that have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that the eye entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a person who suddenly stops up his ears with 2 fingers. Because the sense organ of hearing has become fatigued, a sound is heard in his head. However, both the ears and the fatigue originate in bodhi. Monotony will produce the characteristic of fatigue. Because a sense of hearing is stimulated in the midst of the 2 false, defiling objects of movement and stillness, defiling appearances are taken in. This is called the nature of hearing. Apart from the 2 defiling objects of movement and stillness, this hearing is ultimately without substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that hearing does not come from movement and stillness, nor does it come from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. If it came from stillness, it would be extinguished when there is movement, and you would not hear movement. If it came from movement, then it would be extinguished when there is stillness, and you would not be aware of the stillness. Suppose it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of movement and stillness, a nature of hearing such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came from emptiness, and emptiness would then become hearing and would no longer be emptiness. Moreover, if it were emptiness itself which hears, what connection would it have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that your entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a person who inhales deeply through his nose. After he has inhaled for a long time, it becomes fatigued, and then there is a sensation of cold in the nose. Because of that sensation, there are the distinctions of penetration and obstruction, of emptiness and actuality, and so forth, including all fragrant and stinking vapors. However, both the nose and the fatigue originate in bodhi. Overexertion will produce the characteristic of fatigue. Because a sense of smelling is stimulated in the midst of the two false, defiling objects of penetration and obstruction, defiling appearances are taken in. This is called the nature of smelling. Apart from the two defiling objects of penetration and obstruction, this smelling is ultimately without substance. You should know that smelling does not come from penetration and obstruction, nor does it come forth from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. If it came from penetration, the smelling would be extinguished when there is obstruction, and then how could it experience obstruction? If it existed because of obstruction, then where there is penetration there would be no smelling. In that case, how would the awareness of fragrance, stench, and other such sensations come into being? Suppose it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of penetration and obstruction. A nature of smelling such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came from emptiness, smelling itself would turn around and smell your own nose. Moreover, if it were emptiness itself which smelled, what connection would it have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that the nose entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a person who licks his lips with his tongue. His excessive licking causes fatigue. If the person is sick, there will be a bitter flavor. A person who is not sick will have a subtle sweet sensation. Sweetness and bitterness demonstrate the tongue's sense of taste. When the organ is inactive, a sense of tastelessness prevails. However, both the tongue and the fatigue originate in bodhi. Stress produces the characteristic of fatigue. Because the two defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness, as well as tastelessness, stimulate a recognition of taste which in turn draws in these defiling sensations, it becomes what is known as a sense of taste. Apart from the two defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness and apart from tastelessness, the sense of taste is originally without a substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that the perception of sweetness, bitterness, and tastelessness does not come from sweetness or bitterness, nor does it exist because of tastelessness, nor does it arise from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. For what reason? If it came from sweetness and bitterness, it would cease to exist when tastelessness was experienced, so how could it recognize tastelessness? If it arose from tastelessness, it would vanish when the flavor of sweetness was tasted, so how could it perceive the two flavors, sweet and bitter? Suppose it came from the tongue which is obviously devoid of the defiling objects of sweetness and bitterness and of tastelessness. An essence of tasting such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came from emptiness, the sense of taste would be experienced by emptiness instead of by the mouth. Suppose, moreover, that it was emptiness itself which tasted, what connection would that have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that the tongue entrance is empty and false since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is it spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a person who touches his warm hand with his cold hand. If the cold is in excess of the warmth hand will become cold. If the warmth is in excess of the cold, his cold hand will become warm. So the sensation of warmth and cold is felt through the contact and separation of the two hands. Fatiguing contact results in the interpenetration of warmth and cold. However, both the body and the fatigue originate in bodhi. Protraction produces the characteristic of fatigue. Because a physical sensation is stimulated in the midst of the two defiling objects of separation and union, defiling appearances are taken in. This is called the awareness of sensation. Apart from the two sets of defiling objects of separation and union, and pleasantness and unpleasantness, the awareness of sensation is originally without a substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that this sensation does not come from separation and union, nor does it exist because of pleasantness and unpleasantness, nor does it arise from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. For what reason? If it arose when there was union, it would disappear when there was separation, so how could it sense the separation? The two characteristics of pleasantness and unpleasantness are the same way. Suppose it came from the sense organ, which is obviously devoid of the four characteristics of union, separation, pleasantness, and unpleasantness, and awareness of physical sensation such as this would have no self-nature. Suppose it came from emptiness, the awareness of sensations would be experienced by emptiness itself. What connection would that have with your entrance? Therefore you should know that the body entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Ananda, consider, for example, a person who becomes so fatigued that he goes to sleep. Having slept soundly, he awakens and tries to recollect what he experienced while asleep. He recalls some things and forgets others. Thus, his upside-downness goes through production, dwelling, change, and extinction, which are taken in and returned to a center habitually, each following the next without ever being overtaken. This is known as the mind organ or intellect. The mind and the fatigue are both bodhi. Persistence produces the characteristic of fatigue. The two defiling objects of production and extinction stimulate a sense of knowing which in turn grasps these inner sense data, reversing the flow of seeing and hearing. Before the flow reaches the ground, it is known as the faculty of intellect. Apart from the two sets of defiling objects of waking and sleeping and of production and extinction, the faculty of intellect is originally without substance. Thus, Ananda, you should know that the faculty of intellect does not come from waking, sleeping, production, or extinction, nor does it arise from the sense organ, nor is it produced from emptiness. For what reason? If it came from waking, it would disappear at the time of sleeping, so how could it experience sleep? If it came from production, it would cease to exist at the time of extinction, so how could it undergo extinction? If it came from extinction, it would disappear at the time of production, so how could it know about production? Suppose it came from the sense organ, waking and sleeping cause only a physical opening and closing respectively. Apart from these two movements, the faculty of intellect is as unsubstantial as flowers in space, because it is fundamentally without a self-nature. Suppose it came from emptiness, the sense of intellect would be experienced by emptiness instead of by the mind. Then what connection would that have with your entrance? Therefore, you should know that the mind entrance is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Moreover, Ananda, why do I say that the 12 places are basically the wonderful nature of true suchness, the treasury of the thus come one? Ananda, look again at the trees in the Jeta Grove and the fountains and pools. What do you think? Do these things come into being because the forms are produced and thus the eyes see, or because the eyes produce the characteristics of form? Ananda, if the organ of sight were to produce the characteristics of form, then the nature of form would be obliterated when you see emptiness, which is not form. Once it was obliterated, everything that is manifest would disappear. Since the characteristics of form would then be absent, who would be able to understand the nature of emptiness? The same is true of emptiness. If, moreover, the defiling objects of form were to produce the eyes seeing, then seeing would perish upon looking at emptiness, which is not form, and once it perished, everything would disappear. Then who would be able to understand emptiness and form? Therefore, you should know that neither seeing nor form nor emptiness has a location, and thus the two places of form and seeing are empty and false. Their origin is not in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Ananda, listen again to the drum being beaten in the Jeta garden when the food is ready. The assembly gathers as the bell is struck. The sounds of the bell and the drum follow one another in succession. What do you think? Do these things come into existence because the sound comes to the region of the ear, or because the ear goes to the place of the sound? Again, Ananda, suppose that the sound comes to the region of the ear. Similarly, when I go to beg for food in the city of Shravasti, I am no longer in the Jeta Grove. If the sound definitely goes to the region of Ananda's ear, then neither Moggallana nor Kashyap would hear it, and even less the 1250 Shramanas who, upon hearing the sound of the bell, come to the dining hall at the same time. Again, suppose that the ear goes to the region of the sound. Similarly, when I return to the Jeddah Grove, I am no longer in the city of Shravasti. When you hear the sound of the drum, your ear will already have gone to the place where the drum is being beaten. Thus, when the bell peals, you will not hear the sound, even the less that of the elephants, horses, cows, sheep, and all the other various sounds around you. If there is no coming or going, there will be no hearing either. Therefore, you should know that neither hearing nor sound has a location, and thus the two places of hearing and sound are empty and false. Their origin is not in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Moreover, Ananda, you smell the chandana in this censer. When one particle of this incense is lit, it can be smelled simultaneously through 40 li around the city of Shravasti. What do you think? Is this fragrance produced from the chandana wood? Is it produced in your nose, or does it arise within emptiness? Again, Ananda, suppose this fragrance is produced from your nose. What is said to be produced from the nose should come forth from the nose. Your nose is not chandana, so how can the nose have the fragrance of chandana? When you say you smell fragrance, it should enter your nose. For the nose to emit fragrance is not the meaning of smelling. Suppose it is produced from within emptiness. The nature of emptiness is everlasting and unchanging, and so the fragrance should be eternally present. What need should there be to rely on burning the dry wood in the censer? Suppose it is produced from the wood. Now, the nature of this incense is such that it gives off smoke when it is burned. If the nose smells it, it should be filled with smoke. The smoke rises into the air, and before it has reached the distance, how is it that the fragrance is already being smelled at a distance of 40 li? Therefore, you should know that neither the fragrance, nor the nose's smelling has a location, and so the two places of smelling and fragrance are empty and false. Their origin is not in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Ananda, twice every day you take up your bowl along with the rest of the assembly, and among what you receive may be things of supreme flavor, such as curds, buttermilk, and clarified butter. What do you think? Are these flavors produced from emptiness? Do they come forth from the tongue? Or are they produced from the food? Again, Ananda, suppose that the flavors came from your tongue. Now there is only one tongue in your mouth. When that tongue had already become the flavor of curds, then it would not change if it encountered some dark rock candy. Suppose it did not change. That would not be what is called knowing tastes. Suppose it did change. The tongue is not many substances, and how could one tongue know so many tastes? Suppose it were produced from the food. Food does not have consciousness. How could it know tastes? Moreover, if the food itself were to recognize them, that would be the same as someone else eating. Then what connection would that have with what is called your recognition of tastes? Suppose it were produced in emptiness. When you eat emptiness, what flavor does it have? Suppose that emptiness had the flavor of salt. Then since your tongue was salty, your face would also be salty, and likewise everyone in the world would be like fish in the sea. Since you would be constantly influenced by salt, you would never know tastelessness. If you did not recognize tastelessness, you would not be aware of the saltiness either. You would not know anything at all. How could that be what is called taste? Therefore, you should know that neither flavors nor the tongue's tasting has a location, and so the two places of tasting and flavor are empty and false. Their origin is not in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Ananda, early every morning you rub your head with your hand. What do you think? When there is a sensation of the rubbing, where does the ability to make contact lie? Is the ability in the hands or is it in the head? If it were in the hands, then the head would have no knowledge of it, and how could that be what is called touch? If it were in the head, then the hands would be useless, and how could that be what is called touch? If each had it, then you, Ananda, would have two bodies. If there were only one touch in the head and the hand, then the hand and the head would be of one substance. If they were one substance, then no touch would be possible. If they were two substances, to which would the touch belong? The one which was capable of touch would not be the one that was touched. The one that was touched would not be the one that was capable of touch. Nor should it be that the touch came into being between you and emptiness. Therefore, you should know that neither the sensation of touch nor the body has a location. And so the two places of the body and touch are empty and false. Their origin is not in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Ananda, your mind is always conditioned by three qualities: good, bad, and indeterminate, which produce patterns of dharmas. Are these dharmas produced by the mind, or do they have a special place apart from the mind? Ananda, if they were the mind, the dharmas would not be its defiling objects. Since they would not be conditions of the mind, how could you say that they had a location? Suppose they were to have a special place apart from the mind, then would the dharmas themselves be able to know? If they were to have a sense of knowing, they would be called a mind. If they were something other than you, they would be someone else's mind, since they are not defiling objects. If they were the same as you, they would be your own mind. But how could your mind stand apart from you? Suppose they were to have no sense of knowing, yet these defiling objects are not forms, sounds, smells, or taste. They are neither cold nor warmth, nor the characteristic of emptiness. Where would they be located? We have established that they are represented in neither form nor emptiness, nor is it likely that they exist somewhere in the human realm beyond emptiness, for if they did, the mind could not be aware of them. Whence then would they arise? Therefore, you should know that neither dharmas nor the mind has a location. And, so the two places of mind and dharmas are empty and false. Their origin is not in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Moreover, Ananda, why do I say that the 18 realms are basically the wonderful nature of true suchness, the treasury of the thus come one? Ananda, as you understand it, the eyes and form create the conditions that produce the eye consciousness. Is the consciousness produced because of the eyes, such that the eyes are its realm? Or is it produced because of form, such that form is its realm? Ananda, if it were produced because of the eyes, then in the absence of emptiness and form it would not be able to make distinctions, and so even if you had a consciousness, what use would it be? Moreover, your seeing is neither green, yellow, red, nor white. There is virtually nothing in which it is represented, therefore, what is the realm established from? Suppose it were produced because of form. In emptiness, when there was no form, your consciousness would be extinguished. Then, why is it that the consciousness knows the nature of emptiness? Suppose a form changes. You are also conscious of the changing appearance, but your eye consciousness does not change. Where is the boundary established? If the eye consciousness were to change when form changed, then there would be no appearance of a realm. If it were not to change, it would be constant. And given that it was produced from form, it should have no conscious knowledge of where there was emptiness. Suppose the eye consciousness arose both from the eyes and from form. If they were united, there would still be a point of separation. If they were separate, there would still be a point of contact. Hence, the substance and nature would be chaotic and disorderly. How could a realm be set up? Therefore, you should know that as to the eyes and form being the conditions that produce the realm of eye consciousness, none of the three places exists. Thus the three aspects of the eyes, form, and the form realm do not have their origin in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Moreover, Ananda, as you understand it, the ear and sound create the conditions that produce the ear consciousness. Is this consciousness produced because of the ear such that the ear is its realm, or is it produced because of sound, such that sound is its realm? Ananda, suppose the ear consciousness were produced because of the ear. The organ of hearing would have no awareness in the absence of both movement and stillness. Thus, nothing would be known by it. Since the organ would lack awareness, what would characterize the consciousness? You may hold that the ears hear, but when there is no movement and stillness, hearing cannot occur. How, then, could the ears, which are but physical forms, unite with external objects to be called the realm of consciousness? Once again, therefore, how would the realm of consciousness be established? Suppose it was produced from sound. If the consciousness existed because of sound, then it would have no connection with hearing. Without hearing, then the characteristic of sound would have no location. Suppose consciousness existed because of sound. Given that sound exists because of hearing, which causes the characteristic of sound to manifest, then you should also hear the hearing consciousness. If the hearing consciousness is not heard, there is no realm. If it is heard, then it is the same as sound. If the consciousness itself is heard, who is it that perceives and hears the consciousness? If there is no perceiver, then in the end you would be like grass or wood. Nor is it likely that the sound and hearing mix together to form a realm in between. Since a realm in between could not be established, how could the internal and external characteristics be delineated? Therefore, you should know that as to the ear and sound creating the conditions which produce the realm of the ear consciousness, none of the three places exists. Thus, the three aspects of the ear, sound, and sound consciousness do not have their origin in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Moreover, Ananda, as you understand it, the nose and smells create the conditions that produce the nose consciousness. Is this consciousness produced because of the nose, such that the nose is its realm? Or is it produced because of smells, such that smells are its realm? Suppose, Ananda, that the nose consciousness were produced because of the nose, then in your mind, what do you take to be the nose? Do you hold that it takes the form of two fleshy claws, or do you hold it as an inherent ability of the nature which perceives smells as a result of movement? Suppose you hold that it is fleshy claws which form an integral part of your body. Since the body's perception is touch, the sense organ of smelling would be named body instead of nose, and the objects of smelling would be objects of touch. Since it would not even have the name nose, how could a realm be established for it? Suppose you held that the nose was the perceiver of smells. Then, in your mind, what is it that perceives? Suppose it were the flesh that perceived. Basically, what the flesh perceives is objects of touch, which have nothing to do with the nose. Suppose it were emptiness that perceived. Then emptiness would itself be the perceiver, and the flesh would have no awareness. Thus empty space would be you, and since your body would be without perception, Ananda would not exist. If it is the smell that perceives, perception itself would lie with the smell. What would that have to do with you? If it is certain that vapors of fragrance and stench are produced from your nose, then the two flowing vapors of fragrance and stench would not arise from the wood of Aravana or Chandana. Given that the smell does not come from these two things, when you smell your own nose, is it fragrant, or does it stink? What stinks does not give off fragrance. What is fragrant does not stink. Suppose you say you can smell both the fragrance and the stench, then you, one person, would have two noses, and I would now be addressing questions to two Anandas. Which one is you? Suppose there is one nose, then fragrance and stench would not be two. Since stench would be fragrance and fragrance would become stench, there would not be two natures. Thus what would make up the realm? If the nose consciousness were produced because of smells, it follows that it is in existence just because of smells. Just as the eyes can see but are unable to see themselves, so, too, if it exists because of smells, it would not be aware of smells. If it is aware of smells, then it is not produced from smells. If it had no awareness, the realm of smelling would not come into being. If the consciousness were not aware of smells, then the realm would not be established from smells. Since there is no intermediate realm of consciousness, there is no basis for establishing anything internal or external, either. Therefore, the nature of smelling is ultimately empty and false. Therefore, you should know that, as to the nose and smells being the conditions which produce the realm of the nose consciousness, none of the three places exists. Thus the three aspects of the nose, smells, and the realm of smelling do not have their origin in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Moreover, Ananda, as you understand it, the tongue and flavors create the conditions that produce the tongue consciousness. Is the consciousness produced because of the tongue, such that the tongue is its realm, or is it produced because of the flavors, such that the flavors are its realm? Suppose, Ananda, that it were produced because of the tongue, then all the sugar cane, black plums, wong lean, salt, wild ginger, and kasha in the world would be entirely without flavor. Also, when you taste your own tongue, is it sweet or bitter? Suppose the nature of your tongue were bitter. Then, what would it be that tasted the tongue? Since the tongue cannot taste itself, who would have the sense of taste? If the nature of the tongue were not bitter, there would be no flavor engendered by it. Thus, how could a realm be established? If it were produced because of flavor, the consciousness itself would be a flavor. The case would be the same as with the tongue organ being unable to taste itself. How could the consciousness know whether it had flavor or not? Moreover, flavors do not all come from one thing. Since flavors are produced from many things, the consciousness would have many substances. Suppose that the consciousness were of a single substance and that the substance was definitely produced from flavor. Then, when salt, bland, sweet, and pungent were combined, their various differences would change into a single flavor, and there would be no distinctions among them. If there were no distinctions, it could not be called consciousness. So how could it further be called the realm of tongue, flavor, and consciousness? Nor can it be that empty space produces your conscious awareness. The tongue and flavors could not combine without each losing its basic nature. How could a realm be produced? Therefore, you should know that, as to the tongue and flavors being the conditions that produce the realm of tongue consciousness, none of the three places exists. Thus, the three aspects of the tongue, flavors, and the realm of the tongue do not have their origin in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Moreover, Ananda, as you understand it, the body and objects of touch create the conditions that produce the body consciousness. Is this consciousness produced because of the body, such that the body is its realm, or is it produced because of objects of touch, such that objects of touch are its realm? Suppose, Ananda, that it were produced because of the body. When there was no awareness of the two conditions of contact with and separation from objects of touch, what would the body be conscious of? Suppose it were produced because of objects of touch. Then you would not need your body. Without a body, what could perceive contact with and separation from objects of touch? Ananda, things do not perceive objects of touch. It is the body that perceives objects of touch. What the body knows is objects of touch, and what is aware of objects of touch is the body. What is objects of touch is not the body, and what is the body is not objects of touch. The two characteristics of body and objects of touch are basically without a location. If it united with the body, it would be the body's own substance and nature. If it were apart from the body, it would have the same appearance as empty space. Since the inside and the outside don't stand up, how can one set up a middle? The middle cannot be set up, either. The inside and the outside are by nature empty. From what realm then is your consciousness born? Therefore, you should know that, as to the body and objects of touch being the conditions that produce the realm of body consciousness, none of the three places exists. Thus, the three aspects of the body, objects of touch, and the realm of the body do not have their origin in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Moreover, Ananda, as you understand it, the mind and dharmas create the conditions that produce the mind consciousness. Is this consciousness produced because of the mind, such that the mind is its realm, or is it produced because of dharmas, such that dharmas are its realm? Suppose, Ananda, that it were produced because of the mind. In your mind there certainly must be thoughts, these give expression to your mind. If there are no dharmas before you, the mind does not give rise to anything. Apart from conditions, it has no shape, thus, what use would the consciousness be? Moreover, is your conscious awareness the same as your mind organ, with its capacity to understand and make distinctions, or is it different? If it were the same as the mind, it would be the mind. How could it be something else that arises? If it were different from the mind, it should thereby be devoid of consciousness. If there were no consciousness, how would it arise from the mind? If there were consciousness, how would it differ from the mind? Since it is by nature neither the same nor different, how can a realm be established? Suppose it were produced because of dharmas. None of the dharmas of the world exists apart from the five defiling objects. Consider the dharmas of form, the dharmas of sound, the dharmas of smell, the dharmas of taste, and the dharmas of touch. Each has a clearly distinguishable appearance and is matched with one of the five organs. They are not what the mind takes in. Suppose your consciousness were indeed produced through a reliance on dharmas. Take a close look at them now. What does each and every dharma look like? Underlying the characteristics of form and emptiness, movement and stillness, penetration and obstruction, unity and separation, and production and extinction, there is nothing at all. When there is production, then form, emptiness, and all dharmas are produced. When there is extinction, then form, emptiness, and all dharmas are extinguished. Since what is causal does not exist, if those causes produce the consciousness, what appearance does the consciousness assume? If there is nothing discernible about the consciousness, how can a realm be established for it? Therefore, you should know that, as to the mind and dharmas being the conditions that produce the realm of the mind consciousness, none of the three places exists. Thus, the three aspects of the mind dharmas, and the realm of the mind do not have their origin in causes and conditions, nor do their natures arise spontaneously. Ananda said to the Buddha, "World-honored one, the Thus Come One has often spoken of the mixture and union of causes and conditions, saying that the transformations of everything in the world are created from the mixing and uniting of the four elements. Why does the Thus Come One reject causes and conditions and spontaneity as well? I do not know how to understand your meaning now. Please be so compassionate as to instruct us living beings in the final meaning of the middle way, the dharmas which are not idle theories." The world-honored one then told Ananda, "You have renounced the small vehicle dharmas of the sound hearers and those enlightened to conditions and have resolved to diligently seek unsurpassed bodhi. Because of that I will now explain the foremost truth to you. Why do you still bind yourself up in the idle theories and false thoughts current among people of the world? Although you are very learned, you are like someone who can discuss medicines but cannot distinguish a real medicine when it is placed before you. The Thus Come One says that you are truly pitiful. Listen attentively now as I explain this point in detail for you and also for those of the future who cultivate the great vehicle, so that you all can penetrate to the real appearance." Ananda was silent and awaited the Buddha's holy instruction. "Ananda, according to what you said, the mixing and uniting of the four elements create the myriad transformations of everything in the world. Ananda, if the nature of those elements does not mix and unite in substance, then they cannot combine with other elements, just as empty space cannot combine with forms. Assuming that they do mix and unite, they are then only in a process of transformation in which they depend on one another for existence, from beginning to end. In the course of transformation they are produced and extinguished, being born and then dying, dying and then being born, in birth after birth, in death after death, the way a torch spun in a circle forms an unbroken wheel of flame. Ananda, the process is like water becoming ice and ice becoming water again. Consider the nature of earth, its coarse particles make up the great earth. Its fine particles make up motes of dust, down to and including motes of dust bordering upon emptiness. If one divides those fine motes of dust, their appearance is at the boundaries of form. Then divide those into 7 parts. Ananda, if this mote of dust bordering upon emptiness is divided and becomes emptiness, it should be that emptiness can give rise to form. Just now you asked if mixing and uniting doesn't bring about the transformations of everything in the world. You should carefully consider how much emptiness mixes and unites to make a single mote of dust bordering upon emptiness, since it makes no sense to say that dust bordering on emptiness is composed of dust bordering on emptiness. Moreover, since motes of dust bordering upon emptiness can be reduced to emptiness, of how many motes of such form as this must emptiness be composed? When these motes of form mass together, a mass of form does not make emptiness. When emptiness is massed together, a mass of emptiness does not make form. Besides, although form can be divided, how can emptiness be massed together? You simply do not know that in the treasury of the Thus Come One the nature of form is true emptiness, and the nature of emptiness is true form. Pure at its origin, it pervades the Dharma realm. It accords with living beings' minds in response to their capacity to know. It is experienced to whatever extent is dictated by the law of karma. Ignorant of this fact, people in the world are so deluded as to assign its origin to causes and conditions or to spontaneity. These mistakes, which arise from the discriminations and reasoning processes of the conscious mind, are nothing but the play of empty words which have no real meaning. Ananda, fire which has no nature of its own, depends upon various causes and conditions for its existence. Consider a family in the city that has not yet eaten. When they wish to prepare food, They hold up a speculum to the sun seeking fire. Ananda, let us look into your suggestion that the fire comes forth from mixing and uniting. By way of example, you and I and the 1250 bhikshus unite together to form a community. However, a careful analysis of the community reveals that every member composing it has his own body, birthplace, clan, and name. For instance, Shariputra is a Braham, Uravulva is of the Kashyap clan, and you, Ananda, come from the Gautama family. Ananda, suppose fire existed because of mixing and uniting. When the hand holds up the speculum to the sun to seek fire, does the fire come out of the speculum? Does it come out of the moksha tinder? Or does it come from the sun? Suppose, Ananda, that it came from the sun. Not only would it burn the moksha tinder in your hand, but as it came across the groves of trees, it should burn them up as well. Suppose that it came from the speculum. Since it came out from within the speculum to ignite the moksha tinder, why doesn't the speculum melt? Yet your hand that holds it feels no heat. How, then, could the speculum melt? Suppose that the fire came from the moksha tinder. Then why is fire generated only when the bright mirror comes into contact with the dazzling light? Furthermore, on closer examination you will find the speculum held in hands, the sun high up in the sky, and moksha grown from the ground. Where does the fire come from? How can it travel some distance to reach here? The sun and the speculum cannot mix and unite, since they are far apart from each other. Nor can it be that the fire exists spontaneously, without an origin. You simply do not know that in the treasury of the thus come one the nature of fire is true emptiness, and the nature of emptiness is true fire. Pure at its origin, it pervades the Dharma realm. It accords with living beings' minds in response to their capacity to know. Ananda, you should know that fire is generated in the place where a speculum is held up to the sunlight, and fire will be generated everywhere if specula are held up to the sunlight throughout the Dharma realm. Since fire can come forth throughout the whole world, can there be any fixed place to which it is confined? It is experienced to whatever extent is dictated by the law of karma. Ignorant of this fact, people in the world are so deluded as to assign its origin to causes and conditions or to spontaneity. These mistakes, which arise from the discriminations and reasoning processes of the conscious mind, are nothing but the play of empty words which have no real meaning. Ananda, water is by nature unstable. It may keep on flowing or come to a stop. Kapila, Chakra, Padma, and Asta, and other great magicians of Shravasti often hold up instruments to the light of the full moon at midnight to extract from the moon the essence of water to mix with their drugs. Does the water come out of the crystal ball? Does it exist of itself in space? Or does it come from the moon? Ananda, suppose the water came from the distant moon. Water then should also flow from all the grass and trees when the moonlight passes over them on its way to the crystal ball. If it does flow from them, why wait for it to come out of the crystal ball? If it does not flow from the trees, then it is clear that the water does not descend from the moon. If it came from the crystal balls, then it should flow from the crystal all the time. Why would they have to wait for midnight and the light of the full moon to receive it? If it came from space, which is by nature boundless, it would flow everywhere, until everything between earth and sky was submerged. How, then, could there still be travel by water, land, and space? Furthermore, upon closer examination you will find that the moon moves through the sky, the crystal ball is held in the hand, and the pan for receiving the water is put there by someone, but where does the water that flows into the pan come from? The moon and the crystal balls cannot mix or unite, since they are far apart. Nor can it be that the essence of water exists spontaneously without an origin. You still do not know that in the treasury of the thus come one the nature of water is true emptiness, and the nature of emptiness is true water. Pure in its origin, it pervades the Dharma realm. It accords with living beings' minds in response to their capacity to know. A crystal ball is held up at a certain place, and their water comes forth. If crystal balls were held up throughout the Dharma realm, then throughout the Dharma realm water would come forth. Since water can come forth throughout the entire world, can there be any fixed place to which it is confined? It is experienced to whatever extent is dictated by the law of karma. Ignorant of this fact, people in the world are so deluded as to assign their origin to causes and conditions or to spontaneity. These mistakes, which arise from the discriminations and reasoning processes of the conscious mind, are nothing but the play of empty words which have no real meaning. Ananda, by nature, the wind has no substance, and its movements and stillness are erratic. You always adjust your robe as you enter the great assembly. When the corner of your samgati brushes the person next to you, there is a slight breeze which stirs against that person's face. Does this wind come from the corner of the kashaya? Does it arise from emptiness, or is it produced from the face of the person brushed by the wind? Ananda, the wind comes from the corner of the kashaya. You are then clad in the wind, and your kashaya should fly about and leave your body. I am now speaking Dharma in the midst of the assembly, and my robe remains motionless and hangs straight down. You should look closely at my robe to see whether there is any wind in it. It cannot be that the wind is stored somewhere in the robe, either. If it arose from emptiness, why wouldn't the wind brush against the man even when your robe did not move? Emptiness is constant in nature, thus, the wind should constantly arise. When there was no wind, the emptiness should disappear. You perceive the disappearance of the wind, but what would the disappearance of emptiness look like? If it did arise and disappear, it could not be what is called emptiness. Since it is what is called emptiness, how can it generate wind? If the wind came from the face of the person by your side, it would blow upon you while you set your robe in order. Why would it blow backwards upon the person from whom it was generated? Upon closer examination, you will find that the robe is set in order by yourself, the face blown by the wind belongs to the person by your side, and the emptiness is tranquil and not involved in movement. Where then does the wind come from that blows in this place? The wind and emptiness cannot mix and unite, since they are different from each other. Nor should it be that the wind spontaneously exists without an origin. You still do not know that in the treasury of the Thus Come One the nature of wind is true emptiness, and the nature of emptiness is true wind. Pure at its origin, it pervades the Dharma realm. It accords with living beings' minds in response to their capacity to know. Ananda, in the same way that you as one person move your robe slightly, and a small wind arises, so a wind arises in all countries if there is a similar movement throughout the Dharma realm. Since it can be produced throughout the world, how can there be any fixed place to which it is confined? It is experienced to whatever extent is dictated by the law of karma. Ignorant of this fact, people in the world are so deluded as to assign their origin to causes and conditions or to spontaneity. These mistakes, which arise from the discriminations and reasoning processes of the conscious mind, are nothing but the play of empty words which bear no real meaning. Ananda, the nature of emptiness has no shape, it is only apparent because of form. For instance, travesty is far from the river, so when the Kshatriyas, Brahmins, Vaishyas, Shudras, Bharadvajas, Chandalas, and so forth, build their homes there, they dig wells seeking water. Where a foot of earth is removed, there is a foot of emptiness. Where as many as 10 feet of earth are removed, there are 10 feet of emptiness. The depth of the emptiness corresponds to the amount of earth removed. Does this emptiness come out of the dirt? Does it exist because of the digging, or does it arise of itself without a cause? Moreover, Ananda, suppose this emptiness arose of itself without any cause. Why wasn't it unobstructed before the earth was dug? Quite the contrary, one saw only the great earth, there was no emptiness evident in it. If emptiness came about because of the removal of the earth, we should have seen it entering the well as the earth was removed. If emptiness was not seen entering the well when the earth was first removed, how can we say that emptiness came about because of the removal of the earth? If there is no going in or coming out, then there is no difference between the earth and emptiness. Why then doesn't emptiness come out of the well along with the earth in the process of digging? If emptiness appeared because of the digging, then the digging would bring out emptiness instead of the earth. If emptiness does not come out because of the digging, then the digging yields only earth. Why then do we see emptiness appear as the well is dug? You should consider this even more carefully. Look into it deeply, and you will find that the digging comes from the person's hand as its means of conveyance, and the earth exists because of a change in the ground. But what causes the emptiness to appear? The digging and the emptiness, one being substantial and the other insubstantial, do not function on the same plane. They do not mix and unite. Nor can it be that emptiness exists spontaneously without an origin. Although the nature of emptiness is completely pervasive, it is basically unmoving. You should know that it and earth, water, fire, wind are together called the five elements. Their natures are true and perfectly fused, and all are the treasury of the thus come one, fundamentally devoid of production and extinction. Ananda, your mind is murky and confused, and you do not awaken to the fact that the source of the four elements is none other than the treasury of the thus come one. Why do you not take a look at emptiness to see whether it is subject to such relativities as coming and going? You do not know at all that in the treasury of the thus come one the nature of enlightenment is true emptiness, and the nature of emptiness is true enlightenment. Pure at its origin, it pervades the Dharma realm. It accords with living beings' minds in response to their capacity to know. Ananda, if in one place there is a well empty of earth, there will be emptiness filling up that one place. If there are wells empty of earth in the 10 directions, there will be emptiness filling them up in the 10 directions. Since it fills up the 10 directions, is there any fixed location in which emptiness is found? It is experienced to whatever extent is dictated by the law of karma. Ignorant of this fact, people in the world are so deluded as to assign their origin to causes and conditions or to spontaneity. These mistakes, which arise from the discriminations and reasoning processes of the conscious mind, are nothing but the play of empty words which bear no real meaning. Ananda, the seeing awareness does not perceive by itself. It depends upon form and emptiness for its existence. You are now in the Jeta Grove where you see brightness in the morning and darkness in the evening. Deep in the night you will see brightness when the moon arises and darkness when no moon is visible. The brightness and darkness are discerned by the seeing. Is the seeing identical in substance with brightness, darkness, and emptiness, or are they not the same substance? Are they the same and yet different, or are they not the same and yet not different? Ananda, suppose seeing were one with brightness, darkness, and emptiness. It so happens that where there is darkness there is no brightness, and where there is brightness there is no darkness, because the two cancel each other out. If it were one with darkness, it would cease to exist in brightness. If it were one with brightness, it would cease to exist in darkness. Such being the case, how could it perceive both brightness and darkness? If brightness and darkness differ from each other, how can they form a unity with seeing, which transcends production and destruction? Suppose that the essence of seeing were not of one substance with brightness and darkness, and that you were separate from light, darkness, and emptiness. Then what shape and appearance would the source of the seeing have, as you distinguish it? In the absence of darkness, brightness, and emptiness, the seeing would be the same as hair on a tortoise or horns on a hare. How could we establish the seeing perception without the presence of the three qualities of brightness, darkness, and emptiness? How could we say that the seeing was one with darkness and brightness, since brightness and darkness are opposites? Yet, how can we say that it was different from the three qualities mentioned, since in their absence the seeing perception can never be established? How could we say that the seeing was not one with emptiness, since no boundary is established between them when they are separated from each other? How could we say that they were not different, since the seeing always remains unchanged, regardless of whether it is perceiving brightness or perceiving darkness? You should examine this in even greater detail, investigate it minutely, consider and contemplate it carefully. The light comes from the sun and darkness from the absence of the moon, penetration belongs to emptiness, and solidity returns to the earth. From what does the essence of seeing arise? Seeing has awareness and emptiness is inanimate, they do not mix and unite. Nor can it be that the essence of seeing arises spontaneously without an origin. If the faculties of seeing, hearing, and knowing are by nature all-pervasive and unmoving, you should know that the stable, boundless emptiness, together with the unstable elements such as earth, water, fire, and wind, are together known as the six elements. They are, in nature, true and perfectly fused and thus are the treasury of the thus come one, fundamentally devoid of production and destruction. Ananda, your nature is so submerged that you have not realized that your seeing, hearing, awareness, and knowing are basically the treasury of the thus come one. You should contemplate seeing, hearing, awareness, and knowing to see whether they are subject to production and extinction, whether they are identical or different, whether they are not subject to production and extinction, and whether they are not identical and not different. You still don't know that in the treasury of the thus come one the nature of seeing is enlightened brightness, the essence of enlightenment is bright seeing. Pure at its origin, it pervades the Dharma realm. It accords with living beings' minds in response to their capacity to know. Consider, for example, the sense organ of seeing. Its seeing pervades the Dharma realm. The same is true of the luster of the wonderful virtue of hearing, smelling, tasting, contact, and knowing. Since they fill emptiness in the 10 directions throughout the Dharma realm, how could there be any fixed location in which they are found? It is experienced to whatever extent is dictated by the law of karma. Ignorant of this fact, people in the world are so deluded as to assign its origin to causes and conditions or to spontaneity. These mistakes, which arise from the discriminations and reasoning processes of the conscious mind, are nothing but the play of empty words which have no real meaning. Ananda, the nature of consciousness, has no source, but is a false manifestation based on the 6 organs and objects. Now, take a look at the entire holy assembly gathered here. As you glance at each one in turn, everything you see is like what is seen in a mirror, where nothing has any special distinction. However, your consciousness will identify them one by one, for example, Manjushri, Purna, Maudgalayana, Subhuti, and Shariputra. Does the discerning faculty of the conscious mind come from seeing, from forms, or from emptiness, or does it arise suddenly without a cause? Ananda, suppose your consciousness came from seeing. If there were no brightness, darkness, form, and emptiness, if these 4 did not exist, you could not see. With seeing non-existent, what would be the origin of your consciousness? If your consciousness arose from form rather than from seeing, it would not see either in brightness or in darkness. In the absence of brightness and darkness, it would not see form or emptiness, either. In the absence of form, where would your consciousness come from? If it came from emptiness, it is neither an appearance nor the seeing. Since it does not see, it is unable by itself to discern brightness, darkness, form, or emptiness. Since it is not an appearance, it is in itself devoid of external conditions. Therefore, there is no place for seeing, hearing, awareness, and knowing to be established. Since its location is devoid of these 2, the consciousness that arises from emptiness would be the same as non-existent. Even if it did exist, it would not be the same as a thing. Even if your consciousness came forth from it, how would it discern anything? If it suddenly comes forth without a cause, why can't you discern the moonlight within the sunlight? You should investigate this even more carefully, discriminate it in detail, and look into it. The seeing belongs to your eyes. The appearances are considered to be the environment. What has an appearance is existent. What is without any appearance is non-existent. What, then, are the conditions that cause the consciousness to come into being? The consciousness moves and the seeing is quiet. They do not mix and unite. Smelling, hearing, awareness, and knowing are the same way. Nor should it be that the condition of consciousness exists spontaneously without an origin. If this conscious mind does not come from anywhere, you should know that the same is true of the mind, which makes distinctions, and the seeing, hearing, awareness, and knowing, which are all complete and tranquil. Their nature is without an origin. They and emptiness, earth, water, fire, and wind are together called the 7 elements. Their true natures are perfectly fused, and all are the treasury of the thus come one, fundamentally devoid of production and extinction. Ananda, your mind is coarse and shallow, and so you do not realize that the seeing and hearing are the treasury of the thus come one, and you do not discover that knowing is the same way. You should contemplate these 6 locations of consciousness. Are they the same or different? Are they empty or existent? Are they neither the same nor different? Are they neither empty nor existent? You basically do not know that in the treasury of the thus come one the nature of consciousness is bright and knowing. Enlightened brightness is the true consciousness. The wonderful enlightenment is tranquil and pervades the Dharma realm. It encompasses the emptiness of the 10 directions and issues forth in it. How can it have a location? It is experienced to whatever extent is dictated by the law of karma. Ignorant of this fact, people in the world are so deluded as to assign its origin to causes and conditions or to spontaneity. These mistakes, which arise from the discriminations and reasoning processes of the conscious mind, are nothing but the play of empty words which have no real meaning. At that time Ananda and the great assembly, filled with the subtle, wonderful instruction of the Buddha, the thus come one, were peaceful in body and mind and were without obstructions. Everyone in the great assembly became aware that his or her mind pervaded the 10 directions, beholding emptiness in the 10 directions as one might look at a leaf or an object held in one's hands. All the things that exist in the world were the wonderfully bright inherent mind of Bodhi. The essence of the mind was completely pervading and contained the 10 directions. Then they looked back upon their bodies born of their parents as a fine mote of dust blown about in the emptiness of the 10 directions, sometimes visible, sometimes not, as a single bubble floating on the clear, vast sea, appearing from nowhere and disappearing into oblivion. They comprehended and knew for themselves, and obtained their fundamental wonderful mind, which is everlasting and cannot be extinguished. They bowed to the Buddha and placed their palms together, having obtained what they had never had before. Then, facing the thus come one, Ananda spoke verses in praise of the Buddha. The wonderfully deep Dharani. The unmoving honored one. The foremost Shurangama king is seldom found in the world. It melts away my upside-down thoughts gathered in a million kalpas. So I needn't endure Samkhya eons to obtain the Dharma body. I wish now to achieve the result and become an honored king, who then returns to save as many beings as there are sand grains in the Ganges. I offer this deep thought to those who are as countless as the motes of dust of the Buddha lands, to repay the kindness shown me by the Buddha. In obeisance I ask the world-honored one to certify my vow to first enter the 5 turbid evil realms. If there is even one being who hasn't become a Buddha, at death I will not reach for nirvana. May the exalted hero's awesome strength, his kindness and compassion, search out and dispel even the most subtle of my doubts, causing me to quickly attain the supreme enlightenment, and sit in the body manda of the worlds of the 10 directions. Should even the shunyata nature entirely melt away, this Vajra mind will never waver.